Thank you for all coming to another scholarly conversation tonight. My name is Dr. Servet Yatin, and I have the honor of serving as the Provost and Chief Academic Officer of Quincy College. As I look at the audience today, I not only see familiar faces, but many new ones. So thank you. For those of you who came to any of our Scholarly Conversations event, you already know what to expect from this evening. For those of you who are here for the first time, let me share. Tonight you will not be disappointed. This evening's speakers are not only Quincy College faculty, but experienced professionals with knowledge of topics in the news, including health, technology, and personal and national security. This evening is not only an opportunity to showcase Quincy College's talent, but to keep you, our community members, informed about issues that are relevant to you. Before introducing our presenters, I would like to thank the ingenious and forward-thinking members of the Scholarship, Teaching, and Learning team who established this event and time and again meet the moment with their choice of subjects and speakers. Members of the STL team, please stand for a round of applause for putting together this terrific event. Thank you. Now a few housekeeping items. Please silence your cell phones for the remaining of the evening unless you want to give the next scholarly conversations on your ringtone. Restrooms are outside near the entrance, and in case of emergency, please follow the red exit signs. Finally, each session will be followed by a Q&A, and please don't hesitate to raise your hand when each speaker opens the floor for questions. Dear guests, to introduce the first speaker, I'm going to ask a question. Who is your favorite spy? Ethan Hunt or James Bond? I think there's this secret spy in each of us. I do have one. Tonight, in Under Our Noses, The Spies Among Us, Dr. Jason Roberts will take us back to the 1930s to discuss how Soviet ideology infiltrated the highest levels of the US government. Dr. Jason Roberts has been a professor of history and government at Quincy College since 2010. After completing his PhD at George Washington University, with a dissertation on 1960s radical moving right. He was written extensively on Theodore Roosevelt, the American presidency, the Alger Hiss case, the Rosenberg case, and relevant to this evening's topic, Soviet espionage. In addition to book chapters, he has appeared on C-SPAN, and after this evening, I can't wait to see what is next. Please welcome Dr. Jason Roberts.
Thank you. The topic tonight is Soviet espionage. Here we're basically looking at the period from the 1930s through World War II. This is a period often referred to as the golden age of Soviet espionage. It's estimated by some scholars that over 500 Americans spied for the Soviet Union in the 1930s and World War II, including spying for the State Department, the Treasury Department, the Office of Strategic Services, and perhaps most significantly of all, the Manhattan Project. So two questions to consider. Why do people spy? Why would they spy for the Soviet Union? And examples of Soviet espionage. So as to the first question, there's usually two big reasons that Americans spied for the Soviet Union in the 1930s and World War II. So one reason is ideological. They spied because they believed in the Soviet Union. This is the wave of the future. Communism and centralized planning is the wave of the future. Capitalism, they thought, was dead. as a result of the Great Depression. The other reason is many of these spies believed that by spying for the Soviet Union, they were striking a blow against Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany. So if you talk to them, they would probably say, oh, we're not spying against the United States. We're basically doing this to strike a blow against Hitler. So what are some examples of Soviet espionage? So a good example is Martha Dodd. Martha Dodd was the daughter of the U.S. ambassador to Germany in the early 1930s, and she turned over her father's letters and correspondence to Soviet intelligence in the 1930s. And this is a sensationalistic headline. There's also an element of truth. The Spy Queen was a nympho because it was said that during her time in Berlin, she spent most of her time in bed and basically had many lovers, including a Soviet intelligence officer who convinced her to spy for the Soviet Union. We also have Samuel Dickstein. This is a good example of someone who's kind of an exception to the rule that I just mentioned. He spied for money. So Samuel Dickstein was a congressman from New York. He's one of the founders of the House Committee on Un-American Activities Committee. And we find out decades after he died in 1956, that he had spied for the Soviet Union, and he did it for money, and his code name was Crook. And so the Russians complained that the information he turned over to them was no good, and he asked for too much money. And I think there is a plaza in New York City named for him. We have David Salman. He's another Soviet spy who also spied for money, and he's also a good case of someone we didn't know was a spy until 2008, and this comes out of the KGB files, and he was the man in charge of all communications that went in and out of the State Department, including coded communications, and so it turned out for a few years he was spying for money. We have Lawrence Duggan. He was the head of the Latin American division in the State Department in the 1930s and World War II. And he is an interesting case of someone who, in his lifetime, people rallied around him because he ends up leaving the State Department, and he comes under fire in 1948 in the middle of the Alger Hiss case, and there's allegations that maybe he was a communist, maybe he was a spy, and he ends up jumping out of his office window, or was he pushed out his office window? We don't know. And all these prominent people rally around him, Eleanor Roosevelt, Edward R. Murrow, and say, he's being persecuted, he's innocent. But we now know from the KGB files, from the top secret Venona project, which broke the Soviet code, that indeed Lawrence Duggan was a spy for the Soviet Union. And Alger Hiss, probably when you talk about Soviet espionage, this is often one of the first names that comes to mind, along with the Rosenbergs. So he rises to become an assistant secretary of state in the State Department by World War II, and he is the man who organizes the Yalta Conference in 1945. He's there at Yalta. He also organizes the first meeting of the United Nations in San Francisco in 1945. And so there he is with Harry Truman at the first meeting of the United Nations. And he comes up in a Venona cable from March 30th, 1945, where they mention Ailes. That's his code name. He's at Yalta. His family was involved in Soviet espionage. That fits him to a T. And then after Yalta, he went to Moscow and received a medal from the Russians. So I should know, Alger Hiss is actually one of the few Soviet spies that actually goes to prison. Most of these people get away with it. And technically he doesn't go to prison for Soviet espionage because the statute of limitations had basically expired. But he does go to prison for lying about his relationship with Whittaker Chambers. So he goes to prison. He's sentenced for 5 years, is out within 3.5, and to the day he dies, insists he's innocent. But the evidence is basically overwhelming against him. And then he's also mentioned in a KGB document that's translated into English, and so you see his name, Leonard Alderhis, former employee of the State Department. We have Lachlan Curry. He was a White House aide to Franklin D. Roosevelt. So he was one of the higher placed Soviet spies in the federal government, and he also protected spies within the federal government. And we know that he also told the Russians that the Venona project was close to breaking the Soviet code, and there's evidence that he tried to stop the Venona project as well. We have Harry Dexter White, Assistant Secretary of the Navy. He was probably the most powerful Soviet spy in the federal government. If you take an economic history class, you may know he's the driving force behind the Bretton Woods Conference, which leads to the creation of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. And then later he goes on to be the president of the IMF. And in 1948, he's caught in the middle of his case. He's accused of being a communist and a spy, and testifies in front of HUAC, and then that same month dies of a heart attack. So when he died, there were people who said, oh, maybe he was innocent, maybe HUAC caused his heart attack, but we know from the Venona cables, from documents in the Russian archives, that indeed he was a Soviet spy. We have Nathan Gregory Silvermaster, a government economist who ran the Board of Economic Warfare in World War II, and he supervised a number of agents in the Treasury Department, in the Office of Strategic Services, in Congress. And so he turned over a lot of information, especially on war production. We have Victor Perlo, another government economist. He also ran a very productive Soviet espionage ring and turned over lots of information on war production, so especially military aircraft. We have Duncan Lee. So he's kind of a good example of the Ivy League spy. He's a descendant of Robert E. Lee, went to Yale, was a Rhodes Scholar, went back to Yale for law school, was part of a big law firm, and he ends up being a high-ranking officer in the Office of Strategic Services, which is basically the forerunner of the CIA, and he turned over information about covert operations in Europe during World War II, and also had access to everyone's personnel file. We have Mary Price, who was a Soviet spy and worked for the famed journalist and newspaper columnist Walter Lippmann. And so she gave Soviet intelligence access to Lippmann's files and letters, and she was also in a relationship with Duncan Lee. We have Ted Hall, the boy wonder, basically the Doogie Howser of Soviet espionage, so this young teenage boy who ends up working on the Manhattan Project, and we don't find out he is a spy until the 1990s when the Venona cables are released. So like a lot of these spies, he gets away with it. We have Harry Gold. Harry Gold was originally a chemist in the 1930s, turned over formulas to Soviet intelligence, but he's best known during World War II for collecting information from David Greenglass, who worked on the Manhattan Project, and from the nuclear physicist Klaus Fuchs. So Klaus Fuchs, who turned over information to Harry Gold, and then later during 1950 confessed to Soviet espionage, and so he's one of the few spies that does go to prison for 7 years. So a cable where Goose is basically the code name for Harry Gold, Rest is the code name for Klaus Fuchs. David Greenglass also turned over information to Harry Gold, but he's probably most famous as the brother-in-law to Julius Rosenberg, who initially recruited David Greenglass to spy for the Russians. But we should note with Julius Rosenberg, everyone focuses on his relationship with David Greenglass information from the Manhattan Project. But we should also know Julius Rosenberg was an electrical engineer and basically ran a very productive military and industrial spy ring. So he supervised like a network of Soviet spies that turned over information on radar, on sonar, on military aircraft. And a good example of Julius Rosenberg being mentioned in Venona. So his code names were Liberal and Antenna. And you see his sister-in-law, Ruth Greenglass, mentioned by name. And then another cable, they actually mention his wife Ethel and her age. So despite the fact that the Rosenberg insisted they were innocent, of course, ultimately they're convicted and executed for Soviet espionage. The evidence in Venona in the KGB files is overwhelming against them. We have Igor Gusenko. He is a Soviet clerk in Canada in the Soviet embassy, and he defects in 1945, and basically his defection damages Soviet espionage because he reveals there is a Soviet spy ring in Canada that consists of scientists and politicians, and that also leads to Alger Hiss because he says, oh, by the way, Russian intelligence bragged about this guy who's Assistant Secretary of State, and he's working for the Russians. And for the rest of his life, he basically, when he went out in public, they basically put a mask over his face because initially the KGB tried to kill him. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police basically had to save his life. And it's Elizabeth Bentley that ultimately brings down Soviet intelligence operations when she defects in 1945. So I should note, she had been a courier to the Silver Master Network, to the Kurlo Network, and then ultimately she supervised those organizations. But basically what happens is Soviet intelligence turns against her because she is not a professional spy. She drinks too much. She has multiple relationships with men. So they don't trust her. Like maybe she's going to say the wrong thing. She's going to drink too much and say the wrong thing. So they say, we're taking these networks away from her. And so she thinks they're going to kill her. So what does she do? She goes to the FBI and she names names. Over 80 people in a statement of over 100 pages. And the FBI thinks, oh, we're going to catch these spies. And so they're going to use her as a double agent. But basically what happens is, like something out of a movie, the FBI goes to British intelligence. So the FBI director, J. Edgar Hoover, goes to a British intelligence chief and brags about Elizabeth Bentley. He goes to MI6. And it turns out that Kim Philby, who is a British MI6 officer, is also a Soviet spy. And then he turns around and tells all these Soviet spies, Elizabeth Bentley's a double agent, don't talk to her. And so this what would have been a great attempt, it would have been an intelligence coup if they caught all these people. It comes to nothing. But ultimately, it does shut down Soviet intelligence operations because the FBI is on their case. Unfortunately for Bentley, she could not prove the case against these people. She would come forward in 1948, testify before HUAC, but she didn't have documents, and she was ridiculed as a nutmeg Matahari, a neurotic spinster. So she didn't have the documents. So all the people she accuses, except for two, get off scot-free. But we know with the opening of the Russian archives in the 1990s, with the release of the Venona cables, that actually she was correct. So testifying in front of HUAC. And of course, that leads to Whittaker Chambers, who then comes forward, testifies against Alger Hiss and other Soviet spies. And of course, Alger Hiss will end up going to prison for lying about his relationship with Whittaker Chambers in 1950. And that basically, so the headline, Hiss convicted of perjury in 1950. And that basically paves the way for Joseph McCarthy. So I think it's one of the great ironies that on the one hand, widespread Soviet espionage did occur in the 1930s and World War II, But on the other hand, it's also true by 1945, 1946, many of these people were no longer in the federal government. They were pushed out or eased out of the federal government, but people don't know that, in 1949, 1950, when they're seeing all these headlines, Alger Hiss guilty of espionage, the Rosenbergs guilty of espionage. So when someone like Joseph McCarthy comes forward and waves a piece of paper and says, I have in my hand a list of names in the State Department and they're communists and they're spies, people say, well, maybe he's right. The Truman administration, they're wrong about Alger Hiss. Maybe they're wrong about these other cases. But as we know, his charges against people being communists and spies were reckless and false. So it's kind of one of the great ironies of it all. Extensive Soviet espionage on the one hand, but then you also have kind of the lies and the reckless charges of someone like Joseph McCarthy. So if you want to read further about Soviet espionage, I highly recommend Venona by John Haynes and Harvey Clare. It gives you a nice overview of Soviet espionage. And the other great book, though it is quite a lengthy read, is Spies by John Haynes, Harvey Clare, and Alexander Vasilyev, who was a Soviet intelligence officer. And so this is based on over 1,000 pages of notes that Vasilyev took in the Russian archives in the 1990s. And so much of that was written verbatim, word for word. So it's it's definitely worth the read, even though, as I said, it's definitely like a lengthy book.
So, might not be getting the years right, but thank you. Was there a period where we were allies with the Soviet Union, and so people that were spying were just sort of thinking that they're helping an ally? Like, there was a window like that, correct?
I mean, definitely, June 1941, through the end of World War II, 1945. So I think there were people who, in their minds, they're thinking, well, we're not really spying against the U.S. Like, we're spying against the Germans. We're doing this to strike a blow, against Hitler. So I think maybe in their own mind, they're not really saying like, oh, we're traitors, because they'd say, well, if we were a traitor, we would be turning over information and giving it to a country that's at war with the United States, but that's not the case here. The Russians are allies. So I think that's how they would view it.
But how were the Russians viewed by the U.S. during that period? Were they still sort of like, we can't quite trust them even though we're...
I think to some extent there was like a sense of distrust, and I really kind of see that with the Manhattan Project, because it is telling that Franklin Roosevelt shared information about the Manhattan Project with the British. And like Klaus Fuchs is there at the Manhattan Project as part of the British delegation, but he chooses not to share that information with Stalin. But then Stalin knows because he has people like Klaus Fuchs spying for the Soviet Union. So I do think there was a sense of distrust, and you do have the FBI, starting to investigate, people at the Manhattan Project, and in the federal government, and certainly by the end of World War II, the FBI is like hot on the case of people like Alger Hiss and Victor Perlo.
How has espionage changed or evolved from the past? Is there still value in the kind of human agency that we see here? I mean, I don't know. Maybe you've watched a lot of movies. This is comedy. I'm just kind of inspired by it. But there was a CIA person. Meet the F. You know that movie? It was a comedy. Meet the F. I don't want to say the word, but anyways, in the movie. So the moral of the story, sort of one of them was, you don't need to spy anymore. You can Google. I mean, so
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's value in like human intelligence, which like I think the Soviets were quite good at getting human intelligence. You know, and the U.S., you know, I think in the Cold War, they excelled at kind of more technological, you know, surveillance of the U-2 spy plane and satellites. And Soviet espionage does change, you know, especially you get into the 1980s, the 1990s. Then you get spies like Aldrich Ames for the CIA, Robert Hansen for the FBI, and they're not spying for ideological reasons. Like they're not true believers in the Soviet Union. They're doing, you know, they're doing it for money. You know, Aldrich Ames, you know, he's a drunk, he's in debt, he has a wife with expensive tastes. That's, you know, that's why he's doing it. You know, and the same with Robert Hansen. You know, he's doing it, you know, for the money as well. So why they spy changes. So most of these spies that I've talked about, they would be insulted, you know, if you offered to pay them. You know, like, I'm not doing it for money. You know, I'm doing it because I believe in the Soviet Union. I believe in communism. You know, I want to strike a blow against Hitler. But by the 1980s and 1990s, you're getting Soviet spies that are definitely doing it for the money.
Why did they open the archives?
So a lot of that has to do with the fact that, you know, the Cold War, you know, comes to an end. And then, of course, you have the collapse of the Soviet Union itself, you know, in late 1991. And so under Boris Yeltsin, you know, you have a democratic government, and there's really like a push for like more openness, more transparency. You know, let's release, you know, these documents about the Russian past. So you basically have this brief window in the 1990s where scholars can go in and look at these Russian archives. And there's other, I should also note, like kind of outside this, there's also the American Communist Party records in the former Soviet Union. There's what they call the Comintern record. So this is the Communist International. So it's all the international communists that take orders from the Soviet Union. You have access to those records as well. And then eventually what happens, you know, especially, you know, by the time you get Vladimir Putin, eventually scholars have a harder and harder time getting access to those records.
Every day, I'm so thankful for the many healthcare professionals in our community. I am proud to say that so many of our community registered nurses, licensed practical nurses, and other healthcare professionals have been trained right here at Quincy College. But in times of emergency, we often must rely on each other, including family, friends, and colleagues. In Be Fast, the Science of Stroke Intervention, Dr. Cheryl Profit is here to teach us how we can prevent stroke in the first place, recognize the warning signs, and choose the best treatment options to reduce the long-term consequences. Dr. Profit earned her doctoral degree in nursing education from Regis College. As a professor of nursing at Quincy College for the past 10 years, Dr. Profit has been a tireless student advocate, both internally and externally. She recently presented at the Massachusetts Rhode Island League for Nursing Conference her research findings on the first semester nursing students' success with linguistic modifications. I know I speak for all of us. I'm personally so grateful for this opportunity to learn about this life-saving topic. Welcome, Dr. Profit.
Good evening, everyone. My topic is Be Fast, the Science of Stroke Intervention. Prevention methods, warning signs, and treatment that reduce the long-term consequences of stroke. I'm sure that most of us have heard or have a family member who have had stroke before, so I'm hoping that what I'm saying tonight will help in some way. So what is stroke? It is a condition that occurs when blood rich in oxygen cannot reach the brain cells. So if oxygen cannot reach our brain cells, then those cells will die, because with the blood going to the brain cells, it's loaded with oxygen and glucose. So our brain needs that to survive. So if there's blockage and it doesn't reach the cells will die eventually. So what causes stroke? So there are different reasons why stroke occurs. So one of the reasons is a blockage of some type, because the vessels that feed the brain can be blocked, and that prevents blood from reaching the brain tissues. So there's arteries and veins that go to the brain. So if it's blocked by a clot or any other reason, then the brain will not be supplied with oxygen. And if the brain is not supplied with oxygen, the tissues will die. There's another reason. Blood vessels can rupture, causing blood to escape. So if we have any problems with one of our arteries, let's say we have aneurysm and it bursts, so the blood will be scattered in the brain tissues, and that could cause the patient to have a stroke. So there are different types of stroke. You have ischemic stroke, you have hemorrhagic, and you have TIAs. And we'll talk a little bit about TIAs, but the main focus would be on ischemic stroke. So ischemic stroke, it occurs when a blood clot blocks the flow of blood to the brain. And we just said that if the blood flow is blocked to the brain, then there will be no oxygen going to the brain, so the tissues will die. Or there can be narrowing or blockage of the arteries by fatty tissues. And if you look at the diagram, it shows you, the first shows you where there is the blood clot there. And you can see that the clot is blocking the blood flow going to the brain tissue. And the second diagram, you can see the buildup of plaques in the arteries. And when the plaque is built up continuously, eventually the arteries get narrowed and the blood cannot flow. So that will cause, decreased oxygen going to the brain. Also, if you look at the first diagram, you see the carotid artery, that's the one that takes the blood to the brain. So imagine if that's blocked, what's going to happen? Brain cannot get to our, blood cannot get to our brain. So the tissues will die. So this diagram shows you how the plaques are built up in the arteries. If you look at it, you see the first one is like showing you how your arteries are nice and clear, if the blood is flowing perfectly well. The other one is showing you the plaques starting to build up. Then it continues to build up until it's occludes and the blood cannot pass. So now a clot can form because the blood is pooling there, so the clot can form and eventually it can dislodge and goes to the brain and cause a blockage. So let's talk about hemorrhagic stroke. Hemorrhagic stroke, that's an emergency condition in which the ruptured blood vessel causes bleeding in the brain. We don't need bleeding to occur in our brain because that's going to affect the tissues. And what can cause bleeding in our brain? High blood pressure, or if there's any traumatic event that would be those are the two leading causes. Or the patient can have a brain aneurysm, and after a while, because of the bulge, it can burst and the blood will be scattered in the brain tissues. If the patient is taking blood thinners, so eventually, if the patient is not being monitored, that can affect and cause bleeding. And as we get older, our blood vessels become weak. So that's another reason that you can have hemorrhagic stroke. So the last type of stroke is the TIAs, which is a transient ischemic stroke. And that's a mini stroke. And it's a warning sign. It's telling you, be careful what you're eating, take care of yourself, because This stroke lasts a few minutes. It's a mini stroke, and it only lasts a few minutes. So someone might say, oh, that's nothing. Maybe it's just some kind of pain or something like that. But we need to take it seriously. We need to go and get checked because, you know, the symptoms can occur similar to a stroke, but it lasts just a short while. So most people just dismiss it. But please don't dismiss it. Make sure you get checked out. But stroke can affect any region of the brain. So the brain has different lobes, and each lobe is responsible for different functions. For example, our frontal lobe is responsible for our thinking, our speaking, our speech, how we speak, memory, if we remember things, and for our movement. Then we go to the next in blue. Mine is covered here. That's responsible for our language and touch. Then we go to the temporal lobe in yellow, and that's responsible for our hearing, learning, and how we process our feelings. Then we go to the back, the occipital lobe, that's responsible for our vision and our color perception, how we perceive colors. Then we go to the brown, which is the cerebellum, and that's responsible for our balance and our coordination. And then the last is the brain stem, which is very important because it's responsible for our breathing. Imagine if we're not breathing, what's going to happen? And it's also responsible for our heart rate, which we know that's so important. If we don't have a heart rate, we don't have a pulse, we know what happens. And temperature is also important. So as we see, the brain has so many functions in our everyday life. So let's look at what happens to our right side, the right side of our brain and the left side of our brain. The right side of our brain is for our creativity. So what does it mean? How our attention span, how much attention span we have. Our emotions, that's from your right side of the brain. Our ability to solve everyday problems. How we make decisions and judgment. Memory recall, can we remember things? Our music and our art, do we like music? How artistic we are. And it also controls the left side of our body. So let's look at the left side now. That's our logical side. This side, it shows our ability to speak, to analyze information, how we write, how we read, our math skills. It plans our schedule, how we plan our schedules. And it controls the right side of our bodies. So you might wonder why the right controls the left and the left controls the right. But it's because the nerve fibers cross in the brain stem. So that's why everything is on the opposite side. So here we are, we have right side brain injury, left side brain injury. Like I just said that the brain fibers cross. So if you have a brain damage on your right side, your left side would be affected. That's because of the crossing of the nerve fibers. So let's look at the right side. So the patient has a right side brain damage. So the left side would be affected, right? You will have paralysis on the left side. The patient would have spatial perceptive defect, meaning they have difficulty pinpointing location of things. Things that they see, things that they hear, and things that they feel. Behavior, they would be very impulsive. They would be quick. If they want to get up, they would just get up and don't call for help. but it's because of that side that's affected. So with these patients, if you know that they're impulsive or if you know that they have right side brain damage, you have to be careful and monitor them because of their impulsiveness. You know, they can just get up and they can fall, so you have to watch them. Also, they'll have memory deficits in their performance, things that they do. They might forget and, you know, want to repeat things like that. So let's say we have this stroke, brain damage on the left side. So which side would be affected? The right side, because again, the nerve, it crosses. So you would also have paralysis on the right side. You would have speech and language deficit. Sometimes the patient might not be able to express themselves. They call it expressive aphasia. Sometimes you're talking to them and they're not understanding what you're saying. That's receptive aphasia. Also, the behavior style, they will be slow. If we notice that on the right side damage, they're impulsive. But with the left side now, they're slow. They're slow to move, they're more cautious. And memory deficits with their language. So their difficulty speaking. So let's look at risk factors. What are some risk factors of stroke? So some factors can be modified and some cannot be modified. Those factors that can be modified include hypertension. When we say it can be modified, what do we mean? We mean that, okay, if I have hypertension, I would make sure I take my blood pressure medication, I would take my blood pressure regularly, and I would watch my diet. So I can modify, I do things to make it not be high. Smoking. How can I modify smoking? Smoking, when a person smokes, it causes constriction of their blood vessel. When your blood vessel constricts, it gets smaller. So you have to, the heart has to work harder to pump that blood. Also, the vessels become inflamed. So if you stop smoking, you can modify that. Same thing with diabetes. When the blood sugar is high, it affects the vessel, the arteries. Cardiovascular, the same thing, built up of those plaques. You modify those, modify your diet, and then it can help to decrease those plaques. Sickle cell anemia. Patients with sickle cell anemia, their blood vessels are not like us, always are concave, but with the patients with sickle cell anemia, it's crescent shaped, right? So when those crescent-shaped cells, they clump together because they can pass through the blood vessels because of the shape. So because of that, it can a clot can form and travel to the brain. So what you do is you make sure you have your blood transfusion, take your medication so that the clumping doesn't take place. And if you're overweight, diet, right? Exercise. So those are things that we can modify. So let's look at the non-modifiable things now. Like our age. We can modify our age. We can change our age. It would be great if we could, right? And then gender, biologically, we can change it, right? Hereditary, we cannot change hereditary. And if the patient had a prior stroke or heart attack, we can't change that either. So those are your modifiable risk factors and non-modifiable risk factors. So signs and symptoms of stroke. So now we know that stroke happens suddenly. So we have to be very fast and act fast because it's sudden. So if you're at home and you observe someone, you call 911, and you know the time that the person has the symptoms started. Because the first thing when the person comes, the ambulance or whether you go to the hospital, the first thing they're going to ask you, what time did the stroke start? Only because they need to know that time for the treatment. Especially if it's an ischemic stroke, they needed to know the time so they can give the medication. They give something called TPA, tissue plasminogen activator, to break up that clot. So, but they need to know what time, because if it's 3 hours, you know, if it's within that window, they can give the medication. If it's not, they can't. So that's the reason they ask you for the time. So the National Stroke Association, they want to recognize the signs of stroke. They want you to act fast, right? So F is for face. So you look at the patient's face. Is it normal? Is it to the one side? You know, you look at that. It says, if you notice a droop or uneven smile on a person's face, this is a warning sign. So if you see that, it's a warning sign. A is for arms. Ask the patient to lift their arms. Arm numbness or weakness can be a warning sign. You can ask the person to raise their arms if you are unsure. It's a warning sign if the arm drops down or it isn't steady. S is for speech difficulty. Ask the person to repeat something, you know, and listen to what they're saying. Is the speech slurred? And T is for time. Act fast if someone is experiencing stroke symptoms. You gotta act fast, because knowing what time the symptoms start helps with the treatment. The treatment would be effective if you know what time. All right, so how do you diagnose a stroke? So when you take the patient to the hospital, they will do a CT scan. They're gonna scan to see, okay, is it bleeding? To check to see if there's bleeding there, because if there's bleeding and it's within that time frame, they're gonna give the tissue plasminogen activator to break up that clot. Or they might do an MRI to check to see the lobes where the stroke is, where the brain is affected. And you know, the nurses would monitor bleeding. Another diagnostic tool, they use the National Institute of Health, is the stroke scale. So the normal functioning 0 and 4 is completely impaired. And they use 11 scale items to on this scale. So it goes from 0 to 42. 0 being no stroke symptoms, and 42 would be 21 to 42 would be severe stroke. So long term, there will be impaired mobility if the patient has a stroke. Patient won't be able to move as they were before the stroke occurred. Impaired sensation, they may not be able to feel, you know, if you touch them or if something, the burns or something, the sensation would be impaired. Dysphagia, difficulty swallowing. Aphasia, difficulty speaking. Impaired judgment, you know, especially if they're impulsive, they'll not be able to make proper judgment. And they will have some neglect on one side because the opposite side is damaged, so this side is affected. I have a video which I'll share in 2 minutes. So stroke prevention, again, weight management. Hypertension, you know, you look at your cholesterol, you know, manage your cholesterol, your diet. Smoking, you know, educate the person, you know, about what happens when they smoke, what happens in the blood vessels. If the patient is on an anticoagulant like aspirin or warfarin, you know, you monitor the labs, and the doctor would decrease or increase the dose depending on the result. Early recognition and treatment, you know, that's acting fast so that you can know what treatment to give. So things to recommend, just a few things. Did you know that quick treatment is equal to less brain damage? All right, did you know that stroke is the #2 cause of death worldwide and leading cause of disability? Did you know that every year more than 50 million people worldwide have stroke? Did you know 15 million people, of the 50 million, 5 million recover, 5 million die, and the other 5 million are left disabled? Did you know the most stroke occur over the age of 65, but also can? Did you know that after stroke, regular physical activity will help you improve and return to your daily life. And this is some resources and reference. And the last thing I'll leave you with, time is of the essence, because you need to know what time the stroke occurs. You need to know what time the symptoms start so that treatment can be effective. Thank you.
I have a question. The symptoms, the fast 5 symptoms, do they all occur the same time? Or they could be 2 or 3, maybe 1 symptom?
So once you have this stroke,
Yeah.
so I'm going to do my assessment, and I'm looking for all these things. I'm going to look at your face. I'm going to look at actually to do your arm,
Right.
because you can have the symptoms
Right.
at the same time.
Right.
And so while I'm doing the assessment, those are the things I'm assessing for.
Or could be 1 symptom indicate that's a stroke?
Yeah, the face.
Yeah,
the face is,
yeah,
yes.
it doesn't have to be all 5 together.
Probably not at the same
Okay.
time,
Okay.
but you still, as you continue your assessment, you look for
Okay.
that.
Yeah, seems to me that's important. If I
Yes.
see something, I'm looking for other,
Yes.
they can, arms fine, and then is that stroke or not stroke?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So-
Yes,
So-
thanks. On recovery, the 5 million that you talked about that undergo recovery, how much of that, is that complete recovery or partial?
Some can be
Recovery.
complete, some can be partial, depending on the extent of the stroke.
Okay.
But like if I had a serious, let's say no one get to me on time,
Yeah.
and I'm laying there for hours with a stroke, my recovery it will be different from someone who get treatment early.
Okay, of those 5 million, is it more complete recovery or is it more partial recovery?
I would say half and half,
All right,
I would say.
yeah, thanks.
So I know being fast is going to be really important to get, to professional medical help for the person having a stroke. But is it something that you can do immediately, in terms of physical intervention to minimize the damage? That's one question. And then another question is there something that you can see where someone is about to have a stroke? One other part of this question is, I know if a person has certain attributes, maybe there's likelihood this person might have a stroke later on, but are there certain physical feelings, sensations, symptoms that can tell that a person might have a stroke later on in the future? Yeah.
Some people have warning signs, like for example, if someone's going to have a seizure, they're going to start, saying they have pain or they're going to have some kind of movement. So it differs in different individuals. There may be some sign, I have a headache, or, some nose bleeding or something like that. And then, if you're familiar with the patient, you would know, okay, maybe this is something serious. You want to take the blood pressure, do the vital signs and things like that.
And when someone is about to have a stroke, is it something that you can kind of tell, or?
The patient might complain that, they have a headache, or there might be nose bleeding. They might start bleeding in their nose, so you can.
It's something I can do immediately when that happens, just to minimize damage. Is there something like that, or no? No.
If the patient is bleeding in the nose, you just have them lay down
Okay.
and do your vitals. I mean, if you know what to do, you do your vitals.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, on this subject, I think it's good, if you see someone having a stroke already, all those signs are there, is something you could help to stabilize, besides you call 911, seek help? Is there something else you could do? Like in EMS, you do CPR,
Right.
is some stabilize them, lay them down, or?
Yeah.
So-
If they're breathing, you don't have to do CPR, right?
Okay, right, yeah. Sitting them down,
Or lay them down,
stabilize,
maybe lay down. Lay down is better, laying down is better.
Yeah,
And especially note the time.
Yeah.
Note your time.
Right.
Make sure you know your
Right.
time.
right,
Time is of the essence. Yeah.
that's all, yeah. I also have a question. I think I've heard and many younger people having stroke
Yeah.
now. And healthy younger in their 40s. Do you know why is that? Is something in the medical field that there's a discussed about this? Why
No, the only thing I know is that it can occur in younger people. Can be different causes, like we talk about. Maybe there's some traumatic injury causes bleeding in the brain,
Right,
you know.
yeah.
It can be any blood clot, you know, if they have a heart condition. And so the blood is pooling and then forms a clot, and the clot can dislodge and get to the
Right,
brain.
yeah.
So it can be anything.
Could that be caused by the stress? Or it's more like a cumulative work, life, and, yeah?
I'm not sure about stress.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, thank you.
Is there any way to reverse plaque buildup in the arteries?
No, just diet, I guess, and medication.
Medication.
Is that
Like
re-
if you know that you have this, if you went to the doctor and you have high cholesterol, you try and, you know, do, work on your diet so that you can lower your cholesterol. Exercise, you know, do some exercise. Yeah.
Does that
And
reverse it
medication.
and make the plaque go away, or does it just keep it?
Eventually, maybe it wouldn't go away all, you know, but eventually, once you stick to your diet, your exercise, your medication, it can.
And drones, only an exclusive tool, just a few months ago, fills the air everywhere we go. In Dogs, Drones, and Data, the high-tech law enforcement, Professor Jason Painich will describe the transformative impact of 21st century technology in criminal justice. Prior to moving to the New England area, Jason earned his master's degree from MSU in North Dakota and served as a police officer in Montana. He worked as a training specialist at the Federal Law Enforcement Center and then as a private investigator in New England. Jason has been a professor in Quincy College's criminal justice program since 2009. A fun fact: Jason is a road trip warrior as he has driven across the US, his words, not mine, at least 40 times. But the most recent data from the drone surveillance says it's only 39 times. Welcome, Professor Painich and friends.
Thank you. The title of my presentation is Dogs, Drones, and Data, High-Tech Law Enforcement. And to start us out, I need to take you back to a little bit of a darker day in American history, 9/11. And I know we can all remember 9/11 and where we were when that happened. We probably can't remember what we had for lunch yesterday or a commercial that we saw, but we can certainly remember that particular moment. And the part I want you to kind of remember and think about a little bit are the questions that we were asking immediately after the smoke cleared, right? Where were these people? How come nobody knew about these people? What happened to the tips? Where tips? How come tips weren't shared? Right? There was all these questions about prior knowledge of these individuals and how come we didn't have prior knowledge, and in some cases, some prior knowledge that we had that didn't get shared or didn't get connected to the right people. If you remember, data silos, right, or information silos was another large-scale conversation that we had, and that moment was also an opportunity window. I call it the golden era. To me, it was anyway an opportunity window for the law enforcement industry or the law enforcement profession to expand and begin a large-scale intelligence and information sharing network across the United States to prevent that kind of attack from ever happening again. The first part of that growth was the beginning of fusion centers. And if you don't know what a fusion center is, think of if intelligence is a web, think of fusion center as the nucleus or the center of that web, right? Every state in the United States has at least one fusion center, and the idea there is you have all of these police departments within a state that are collecting bits and pieces of information, That information flows up, the raw data flows up to the Fusion Center pushes back down intelligence. This police department now has a better opportunity to connect, maybe over person of interest, right? That goes from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, right? Connect with this person, with this department, with this department. At the same time, the statewide Fusion Centers feed up to the federal system, and of course the federal system feeds back down. At the same time this took place, we were still experiencing the internet revolution and the smartphone revolution and the hyperconnectivity of our American society. Right? Our consumer agencies, Google, Microsoft, going great guns with all the technology that they provided us, the wearable technology, from our wrist to our glasses, that we're producing data and data and data and data and data. This large-scale data production. All right, and that leaves a lot of very interesting what we call digital dust or digital footprints, right? The notion of everything that you have clicked on at some point in time is collected and culled and archived someplace in some database somewhere, sometimes governmental, sometimes not-for-profit, sometimes for-profit, right? And all of this development gave us this layering effect of data collection or big data, right, leading to what we call oftentimes smart cities, right, or in the police parlance, layered or flock technology, right? The idea that there are multiple layers of information available that can be drilled down into. In talking about one of the larger programs developed between NYPD and Microsoft, Mayor Bloomberg simply said, "This isn't your father's police department anymore." When we're looking for actors of today, those people who threaten us, it's essentially like looking for a needle in a stack of needles, right? The beauty of a free America is that those people who would do us harm can sit right next to us on the bus or any other place, and we don't know who they are, right? But we demand it, right? We will not have another 9/11. We will not have another January 6th, right? And sometimes individuals are easy to find. Now, we could go to Minnesota. We just find out who has season's tickets to the Vikings, match up the picture to this guy, easy to find, right? This is you don't need a lot of technology to hunt up that guy. You just need a citizen to pick up the phone and call. This individual, on the other hand, is a little tougher to find. Is that a man or a woman? I don't know. What is their ethnicity? I don't know. What language do they speak? I'm not entirely sure. Do they have tattoos? Couldn't tell you. What color are their eyes? Not really sure, right? They took great care to hide their identity. How do we find that needle in a stack of needles, right? Well, there's some pieces in here that we can use, right? Notice the garb that this individual is wearing, the different patches, right? On the helmet, the head, the blue sunglasses. Things of this nature all of a sudden become very important to our intelligence and investigation apparatus. So artificial intelligence. We hear all about artificial intelligence and neural networks and how we have these tools today that will enable, essentially take all of our jobs, but also enable us to do all these amazing things. You tell it what you want it to find, and it will creep the web and not only find what we're looking for, but also start to create networks and create connections between disparate data points that a human would never be able to collect, to tie all of those bits and pieces together, right? They allow us to network all of these different databases and information together. And there's a lot of programs, some which you've heard and some which you haven't, right? Facial recognition. Facial recognition programs simply do a digital map of the face. There's a variety of different providers of those, so that some of them, operate a little differently than others, but essentially it's a mapping of the face and then a recognition against another database of faces. Where artificial intelligence comes in on top of that is, instead of matching to a pre-existing database, like say you had a sex offender registry, right? You could take a photo and match it back to that database. Artificial intelligence will go out into the web and look for that picture in other places, other databases, right? So we can have a greater search pattern of that. Some problems with facial recognition, though. Facial recognition is, number one, it's not perfect. It's fallible tech. All tech is fallible still. People of color, it does not work nearly as well on people of color, and specifically females. The error rate on that is a little bit uncomfortably high for that particular group of individuals, female people of color, right? Gait or movement recognition. Now, we've all been a place where you're sitting at a bus stop or in a restaurant or something, and you're just previewing the crowd just like this, and you see a movement, and you say, something's going on over there, right? Now, you can't hear what they're saying. You don't know what the conversation's about, but you know there's something about how they behave that attracts your eye and makes you go, hey, honey, watch over there for a second. Something's going on over there, right? We see that. We know movement recognition. Well, artificial intelligence allows us to not only map out the movements of individuals, but then also re-recognize those movements later on. The person I showed you in the black, that person has a particular gait. He has a particular speed at which he walks, the distance that he travels when he moves, right? Those are measurable factors that can then be brought back. This is interesting tech. They use it a lot in big crowds to look for suspicious actors. So an example, I don't have one that where it's actually been put into play, but these are things that law enforcement officers, it takes years to pick up on that, but there's a street knowledge, right, that law enforcement officers will talk about and say, I kind of know that, right? This is that in the computer system, right? The ability to check that out. Image recognition. So take a picture, go find me this other picture someplace, right? That's pretty straightforward. We can use that photograph that we took, send that out, look for other individuals with those patches on them. You remember during the Boston bombing, we looked for white hat, black hat, right? We look for pictures with those people. And doing that with 10,000 pictures is almost impossible, but with artificial intelligence, it takes about 20 seconds, right? Voice pattern. If anybody has spoken a text message to your phone, if you went home and used your Alexa, right? Those kind of technologies are voice pattern recognition. They know how you say things. You train them, right? I know I say my R's. You guys don't, right? Not being from here. But that is recognition and, most importantly, housed someplace. Beyond housed someplace, it's sold someplace. This data, this compilation of all of this data in all of these various places has given rise to these third-party data vendors. One of great interest to me is Clearview. Clearview is a company that specializes in matching out facial recognition. They claim to have 40 billion images of people in their database. Okay? It's a third-party company. They scrape the internet, all of your public Facebook posts, your kids' TikToks and Twitters where they, here we are at the birthday party. All of that, they scrape and they house, right? Law enforcement has the ability to buy data from third-party vendors, either through a portal, kind of monthly subscription kind of a plan, or you can buy aggregated data in bulk from these third-party vendors, right? And then not-for-profits as well. One I like to point out, Thorn. If anybody remembers the actors Ashton Kutcher and Demi Moore, they started this not-for-profit organization called Thorn. Thorn has a product called Spotlight. They are heavily involved with law enforcement in trying to identify child pornographers. What Thorn has been able to do is use their image recognition software. Now, child pornographers aren't too excited about having their faces in the pictures, but other things like vein patterns on the back of a hand, patterns on a bedspread in a hotel room, things of this nature. You can't wipe all of that away, right? So through their recognition programs, thus far, according to them, they have identified 14,000 kids of interest, returned those kids back to their rightful places, and are responsible for the rest of 16,000 offenders. That's pretty powerful technology, right? Pretty powerful action in there. Marauders, or transient criminals, right? The smiley face killer. Smiley face killer was an individual who liked to kill college-age men. We had a couple of incidents in Boston where there was some belief that this individual had maybe been here, but the way the pattern of where the bodies were found, right? They knew, or law enforcement believed that it was the same individual, but they were found in state after state after state after state. So the idea was that perhaps this individual was maybe a truck driver or somebody who was driving through, state through state, a long distance truck driver, killing people along the way, right? Now, the application here would be not only to then look at license plates, and we didn't have any faces for facial recognition, but then to look at things like trucking logs, right? Things like gas station receipts, and start to match up where the same truck, the same log, the same driver was in the town when the murder happened, right? And start to work it backwards that way. License plate readers, maybe a little less exciting than artificial intelligence, but still very, very important to the layering effect here. That's why I threw it in. A variety of different kinds. I'm sure you've seen them on the police cars nowadays, right? They have all these weird cameras bolted to the hood and the trunk of the police car. And the notion here is the police officer drives down the road, click, 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 click. It's just license plate after license plate, right? Thousands of images. There's a company called Vigilant Solutions that's very big in the license plate industry. They claim to have over 1 billion license plate images in their repository. They can be either mobile, quick deploy. If you have a maybe you have a football game coming to town, you want to set up the license plate reader, see who's coming in for the moment, and then take it down. Obviously, stationary ones that can stay in one particular spot all the time. I had some dealings with the police department who was concerned about human trafficking, and they felt that the traffickers were utilizing a series of like a chain of not a hotel chain, but the same hotels over and over again, right? So set up the license plate readers there to see how fast they were coming. They also provide image recognition, vehicle characteristics. Someone hit me, I didn't get the license plate, but it was blue Toyota, and it had a crashed up front fender, right? That's the kind of description that this would help us find. And these are used, though, by also private companies and public agencies, such as tow truck companies, your insurance companies, things of that nature. Unmanned aerial vehicles or police drones, right? Now, drones are really kind of changing up the game a little bit. There's some really cool stuff going on with this, but drones as first responders. So the idea here is that, and Miami is doing this now, what they have decided is set up a network of drones on top of buildings at strategic locations so they could get anywhere with a drone fast in the city, right? So think of a city, drones on top of multiple buildings there. Somebody calls in and says, hey, there's an incident, 5th and Main, right? There is a certified drone pilot back at the police station, just like a military kind of a concept where you have, the person back here is flying the drone up there. It's in a charging station and dock. He hits the button, up it goes. They're there right now, right? Now we are seeing catching individuals who are there. We have surveillance and video of the area. And most importantly, since we've all said we want police reform and greater police oversight, also have an oversight ability, right, of management administration to look through the eyes of the drone and guide officers as to where they need to be, but also to monitor what officers are doing and guide them accordingly, right? Search and rescue, we've seen multiple stories in the paper now about drones affixed with different kind, like infrared sensors, things of this nature. Very quick to drop one out of the back of a police car, pop it up, search a field for a missing person. Maybe an elderly person walks away. They're out there in the weeds someplace. Provides very search capability there. Rescue capability. You have a boat that's overturned. I know Scott. I don't know if he likes to go out in the ocean or not, but he seems like a sailor, right? Gets out there. The waves get a little choppy. The boat flips. We send out a drone, drop in some flotation equipment, and at least he can float around out there until the Coast Guard or somebody else can get there, right? The other interesting thing about a drone is you get many of the same benefits you do from a helicopter, especially when you have them networked out through your city. LAPD spends $50 million a year. $50 million. They have 17 helicopters that fly 20 hours a day. It's about $1,500 an hour to fly a helicopter. Significantly cheaper to do a drone system throughout your town, right? And you get a lot of the same benefits. Even the smallest police department can't afford this, so it augments even the smallest of police departments, right? Mission creep, armed drones, right? Right now, you cannot arm drones in Massachusetts. You cannot arm that. We don't allow that here. There is certainly the question about that. North Dakota does allow the arming of drones. It's the only state that I know of that has legislation that allows them to be armed, and currently they use non-lethal munitions on that. So pepper spray, dispersant canisters, and pepper balls is what they use out there. So back to the January 6th event, right? The layering thing here. So we have a space on the map, right? The Capitol. We have a geofence warrant that essentially says it's a search warrant that goes into the big providers and says, I want everything out of this area. Okay. From that geofence warrant, social media posts come out. Both those are public, and through the warrant would be private. Facial recognition can be deployed with the use of not only federal resources, other government resources like RMV and passport services from all the different states and the State Department, and private vendors. Clearview, that 40 billion images, that's where we're going to use that. Money transactions, PayPal, Venmo, Amazon Pay. There is one of the case studies in that event of an individual who was of a high interest. The only way that they were able to identify him, because he was very good about hiding his identity and whatnot, was they had purchased a pizza the night before, and then they used PayPal to pay for the pizza, and then Venmo'd each other like that, their half of the money, right? And so that the little network or cabal of these individuals was picked up there. In-app data, Google and Maps. You've all used your maps. You know, your maps on your phone will tell you 300 feet to your destination, right? That's incredibly precise accuracy that is on all the time with your cell phone. Things like Bumble and Groupon, right? A Bumble is a dating app for those of you who don't already have it. And when you go to a new town, it updates and says, here's likely people of interest in the town that you're in now, right? So even though we maybe think we're being kind of sneaky, our app is actually working against us in this way. Video and image recognition, the audio again, black hat, white hat, Boston bombing. Talked about that. Cloud connection, so once you have the cloud, you get the email, the text, social media, and deleted material, right? That's not coming back. That's all able to be pulled up. License plate readers, Bluetooth beacon and Wi-Fi routers. If you opened up your cell phone since you've been in here, you probably got the message that says, do you want to be connected to our network, right? That's what that is. So we can now pattern not only when people get into a building or walk around an area, but also exactly their pattern of travel and time within that area. So it's very damning evidence in the criminal trial. Private vendor data aggregation, other kind of aggregation, what they call scrapers or internet scrapers. Rideshare, Uber, Lyft, they have not only past rides, but certainly the current system, as well as your location and all of your information in your web search history, right? So going back, use this, drill down through these multiple layers of private, non-governmental, and governmental data providers to identify, in this case, over 1,200 people, right? That's a lot of people to identify in that situation, right? In a fairly short amount of time. But there are some things to consider. Changes to the police-citizen relationship. The shot heard around the world was right up the street. How do you feel about law enforcement having access to all this information, and more importantly, having the ability to purchase information from third-party vendors, right? The implications of that for a search warrant, right? Encroachment upon constitutional protections. Does this kind of power cool law enforcement, your appreciation for things like First Amendment rights? You know, would you not go to a demonstration, or would you not say something for fear that this is going to be collected later, right? Security of the technology itself. You know, we always have a fear of hacking, third parties using this. I dare to say the last 4 years of news media shows us a lot about various other uses of technology, and so there's always that security there. The Fourth Amendment, the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures. That is a right you have. You already own that, right? How does this challenge that? You know, I will say, Massachusetts has some legislation pending right now. There is a bill about data location privacy. That one is in the House right now, as well as other location or other data privacy issues. Now, my talk was dogs, drones, and data. Thanks about that. Thank you for that. Appreciate that. So I want to show you a dog, right? Everybody likes dogs, so let's look at Spot. Spot. Is anybody allergic to dogs? If you're allergic to dogs, that's okay. So I'd like to introduce you to Spot. Spot. Good boy. Huh? This is Spot, everybody. So, I thought it would be fun. You know, talking about data is one thing, but it's kind of hard to see, right? And you know, the Massachusetts State Police made quite a splash not too long ago about introducing this technology into its service. So, Mass State Police was good enough to allow us to have the time of Trooper John Ragosa from the bomb squad and his dog Spot to come and show us and talk to us a little bit about some of this 21st technology.
Person shot the robot 3 times. So that's what we use Spot for, to send them in the area. Instead of sending a person in, we're going to utilize robotics and remote operations to make sure the officers are safe and everybody surrounding that scene is safe. So they were kind enough to loan me a loaner robot today. So that's why he's really, really bright yellow. So. But we use robotic operations and several different things. The Holy Trinity and Bomb Squad robots are picking up object, going upstairs, and opening doors. So Spot does those things automatically. All we do is point and click, and he goes right up the stairs. There's algorithms inside him, open doors. I just have to tell him which way the door opens. He'll figure out what kind of doorknob it is, hinge, push, and go right through. And then going upstairs, it's right upstairs. Picking up objects is just point and click on a little Nintendo Switch control that we have here. So that's some of the things we do with Spot.
So this individual shot Spot last night.
He did. So it was a hostage. Like I said, the hostage was released. The gentleman was in the room with a firearm. He came out, actually pushed Spot over, and Spot has a self-righting function. So that's how he was, because he pushed him over. So all we have to do is go over here and push self-right. Say I'm not touching anything, and Spot's going to get back up on his own, and then we're back in business. So he pushed him over, went back toward the officers. He was going to go back up the stairs, potentially engage the officers with his rifle, and I started chasing with the robot because I wanted to see where he was going. So he came back over, pushed Spot over again, and shot him 3 times. So he was fully operational at the end, but he did have a battery issue, so that's why they gave us a loaner for a couple of days. Right, so some of the things that we do, like we said, picking up object, going upstairs, opening doors, and that's all done through the operational arm that we have right here. Has about almost 6 feet of view. Can grab things as different torque objects. You can rotate the arm if you have to, whatever you have to do. It has several different cameras. As you can see right here, this is the gripper cam. There's a camera here, his main body cam, one on each side and one in his tail. So we use those things to pick up objects, observe things, make sure other people are safe, keep an overwatch. There's also, if everybody's familiar with CBRN, chemical, biological, nuclear, radiological, etc. explosives, where there's a package you can put on him to putting a person in a bodysuit and a protective gear and sending them downrange on a potentially chemical, biological, or nuclear event. We have a package that they put on Spot and send Spot down there. He sends a radio signal back with all the readings. So we, things like that. I know businesses use them to replace people or replace jobs. We're doing that, but in a safe way. We don't want to replace anybody's job, but we don't want to lose any officers and keep people safe at the same time. So we use Spot in the police world for remote operations. And first day at bomb school, they teach you remote operations. You don't want to stay on a package any longer than you have to, which is called time on target. So we use Spot for a lot of things like that. We also, if Spot gets trapped in a room or anything like that, we have a 3D mounted drone platform where we launch drones from, little Maverick Mini 2s. So if Spot goes in a room and he's kind of trapped and we want to see over something, we'll launch the drone off the back and then do a 360 of the room things like that. So again, it's just keeping people out of harm's way by using Spot. He can turn knobs, he can turn valves, he can turn all those things. If there's a gas leak and that valve needs to be closed, we can send Spot in. Using the controller, I can control those valves and shut all the power off or turn the gas off or anything we need to do like that.
Now you're with Explosive Ordnance, so we talked a little bit about using this from a FEMA standpoint, right? Earthquake, a bridge collapse, a building collapse, things of this nature.
Yeah.
Right? Can you talk a little bit about how that might be used in that capacity?
For searches and stuff?
So yeah.
Yeah, so again, so there's 1,400 of these deployed worldwide with Boston Dynamics. They patrol the ruins of Pompeii for security reasons. You can pre-program things, all different kinds of do. We don't really use it for that application, but one of the things is if it's an area that's very, very dangerous for people to go down, right? We're going to use a robot. We're going to use robotics to help us and go down that path where we don't really want to send somebody who might be too dangerous. I run an explosive detection canine as well. I have a lab. He smells out explosives and explosive precursors. So if the area is too dangerous for him, I'm not going to go down. I'm not going to send my dog somewhere I don't want to go. So we'll grab Spot here, the fake dog. Sorry, buddy. We're going to send him down there and observe the area. He has thermal cameras. If something's warm, if I have to detect something that's very hot, he has a camera on the back. It's not on there now, but the one we have is a thermal camera. So if I can see something has a thermal image on it or a heat signature, I'm going to know, and not knowing by just looking at the object potentially.
Last question: Do you foresee any kind of offensive arming of this kind of technology in Massachusetts?
So, you talked earlier a bit about arming a robot. So you cannot arm a robot or robotic platform in the state of Massachusetts. We, however, use what's called an energetic tool. It's called a PAN, percussion actuated non-electric disruptor. It's basically a small tube, kind of like a barrel of a gun. And we're going to fill that with water, cap it, and we're going to put an explosive load, maybe like depending on what we want to open, a shotgun blank round. So the energy in that tube, the pressure that builds up in that water is going to rip open a package. Because the last thing I want to do is go down there in the movies, you see them open, cutting the wires and all that. That is the absolute last step. That is, I cannot evacuate the building, and there are a ton of people in there, and I'm going to go cut some wires, and I'm going to do my diagnostics. But if we have a package downrange that we want to open, and I'm really worried about that package, or I can't see inside it, and my x-ray is indeterminate, I'm going to blow that package open with water. So the way we do that is we fill that tube with water, cap it, and we put a shotgun blank, depending on what we want to open, the size of load in there. And the water from that, believe it or not, that'll go through a car door. So the water in that, the pressure that builds up in that pipe will rip that package wide open. Now I can send Spot back down and see what the contents are. Now I have everything is nice and open, and now I have, it's nothing, or it's something I have to be concerned with, a pipe bomb or a device. So that's where he comes in handy. But right now you cannot arm any robotic platform to be used on a person, anything like that. And I don't see that changing, and that's fine. But we do have, that's not a shotgun on the robots that we have now. It's an energetic tool. We wouldn't use that on a person. We'd use that on an object or a package.
Thank you.
Ball game. So I took my two sons. We were in the Arlington Street T-stop when the bombs went off. Mm-hmm. That day there was a big police presence there, but it was before they used to have the bomb-sniffing dogs. And do you think that if that day they had had some of this technology that they might have been able to find a pressure cooker bomb?
Well, as far as the smell of it and the identification of it, I'll have to defer to John.
Yeah, so what they did in that situation, they harvested a black powder and smokeless powder from fireworks. Mm-hmm. So our dogs, the government spent billions and billions of dollars trying to come up with an electronic sniffer, and they circled back to the canine. Okay, because for all their shortcomings, their nose and their ability to smell things, like my dog is imprinted on a bunch of different odors and also precursors. Okay, so when a dog smells a device, he doesn't smell, oh my gosh, that's a device. Like when he smells a pepperoni pizza, the brain compartmentalizes it. Okay, I have pepperoni, flour, water, all the ingredients of a pepperoni pizza. So when he smells a device, he doesn't smell a device, he smells one of the components, one of the explosive precursors that we're looking for. Ammonium nitrate and fuel oil. You need ammonium nitrate, and you also need diesel or some kind of fuel. Well, we don't want it to smell diesel, we want it to smell the ammonium nitrate. Because if I'm looking for something in a package and I smell diesel, that's just diesel gas. I don't want that. I want AMFO, or I want ammonium nitrate, the precursor to AMFO. So it's a hard question to answer because there were so many packages that day, and I was there too, and there's so many packages that were there. How do you do? Would you say no packages? Or do you say only clear bags like Foxborough Stadium? Or do you do checkpoints? So there are a lot of ways, and it's not a sterile area. You have buildings, you have alleys, you have people that can come through the buildings that have been there. It's not really a sterile area. You can make it a sterile area, but it's going to come at a cost, it's going to be time, it's not going to be convenient. You know, I was at Logan Airport after 9/11, and before that, everybody was like, oh, check my bag, it's fine after 9/11. But then 6 months later, everybody's like, do we have to go through this again? You know, you have to check my bag. So people kind of get complacent and they kind of forget. But after the day after 9/11, everybody's like, check my bags, check my shoes, you know, whatever you want. But later on, people start to say, oh, this is not convenient anymore. So it comes at a cost. I really can't answer your question. Possibly, but our dogs are trained to sniff all different kinds of powders.
And they have those checkpoints now at the airport where they're walking people through one at a time, kind of halfway through that security line, to do exactly that. So the dog can get a sniff of one person, so to speak. Right? So I would have to presume yes if the dog was in the vicinity. Yeah. Jim?
I got two, I think, short questions. One, is it purely a coincidence that the robot looks like a dog? Is that the most efficient way for it to get the jobs done? Or is there a psychological element to make it look like something that people can relate to?
If I knew that, I'd Boston Dynamics.
Okay, all right.
I'd make a lot more money. No, but I think it's ergonomically, it's a stable platform. So if I come in the house and I try to kick Squad over,
Right.
he's not going over.
But like he's this position, like the head of the dog rather than right in the middle. It's kind of interesting. But my other question was, the person who shot the robot last night.
Yes.
Obviously committed crimes, so he's been charged with other stuff.
Yes.
But is the act of shooting the dog itself a crime?
Oh, because technically
Because
it's a
it's-
police dog, not the same as a
no.
police canine. If someone, God forbid, shot my canine, no, it's a totally different story. So it was determined that the destruction or his action on the product caused X amount of dollars damage. It would be a monetary thing at the end. It'd be tacked on. I mean, it's $300,000. I don't know if I can write a check for $300,000. So again, you'd probably go after him for the charges of the cost, not necessarily. I mean, I'm discharging the firearm. Other than that, or anything else that the ATF wants to look at as far as licensing and all that, but we'd probably be looking at a monetary issue or like evaded destruction of property. So that's.
Again, you will have plenty of time to ask your questions because I believe Trooper Ragosa is staying for the
Yes.
question. Thank you, I appreciate that. So thank you, Professor Painich, for your fascinating presentation. And it's made all the more special thanks to Trooper Ragosa and Spot. Before we all adjourn to the refreshments, please extend one more round of applause to Professor Jason Roberts, Cheryl Prophet, and Jason Painich. Thank you. Once again, a big thank you to our surprise guest, the Trooper John Ragosa, a certified bomb technician, explosive detection canine handler, and Boston Dynamics liaison and technical advisor from Massachusetts State Pole Bomb Squad and his friend Spot. Thank you. I mean, these speakers showed us what 21st century technology looks like in our local law enforcement communities. Just absolutely fascinating. So please join me in thanking the staff from throughout the college, including the library, academic and executive support, IT, marketing, and facilities. Their hard work and organization made this evening possible. Thank you. A big thank you to QA TV for generously helping with recording and sound technologies. Wherever we call upon QA TV, the answer is always yes. And to that, I can only say thank you. Last but not least, to all of our guests this evening, students, faculty, alumni, and community members, thank you so much for taking the time to support not only our speakers, but Quincy College. I'm so pleased to see familiar faces tonight in the audience. Congratulations, you are now all ambassadors for Quincy College, so please spread the word. Thank you all for coming, and see you next time.
How you doing? My name is Trooper Gosa. I'm a state trooper with the Massachusetts State Police on the bomb squad, and what we have here today is Spot, the robot dog from Boston Dynamics in Waltham. We have 2 of these statewide right now. We're looking to get a 3rd. Spot does a bunch of different things for us. He picks up object, goes upstairs, open doors automatically. Some of the things that we want to use. You can see right here he has his arm. We use the arms to pick things up. Extends at about 6 feet almost as tall as me, to view inside rooms, around corners, things like that. We want to make sure that the room is safe before we send somebody in. Spot can look around for us, see what's going on inside that room, take him back to the stow position. Walks around, goes upstairs, you can duck down, you can have him sit. And if someone happens to knock Spot over, Spot rolls over. All we have to do over here is go to our little controller. Hit self right. Spot's gonna get up and get back in action. So. Take a bow, Spot.